Good morning. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brockler this morning as well as tomorrow morning from 6 to 10 here on News Talk 710 KNUS. Of course, I host the 6 a.m. Saturday show known as the Jimmy Sengenberger Show, 10 years running here on 710 KNUS. So that means 3 days in a row of yours truly at 6 in the morning, and it is still dark and early outside, but we have much to discuss and certainly welcome your participation at 303-696-1971 if you want to join into the festivities. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. Name and town if you wish to text in, please. And there are a couple of ways that you can email yours truly directly, 24/7, 365. One, if you go to my show's page, the Jimmy Sengenberger Show at 710knus.com, you can email me directly, as well as my website, jimmysengenberger.com. Keep in mind, there's no A, I, or U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. And social media. I'm on the social webs. The app formerly known as Twitter. I am at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro is where you can get me there, or just search Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality. Coming up in the next hour, our one guest on the roster today is Rabbi Jonathan Hausman out of Stoughton, Massachusetts. He is just absolutely phenomenal. I always enjoy talking with him about a variety of issues, ranging from the blues to anti-Semitism and the rising scourge of anti-Semitism in our society today, in our country, Israel and Hamas. There's so much to discuss with Rabbi Hausman. He's always a phenomenal guest, and he will be joining us in the 7 o'clock hour. As of now, we are wide open otherwise, and that means you can participate. Again, 303-696-1971. We do have much to discuss. Of course, the latest going on vis-a-vis Israel and the war of the terrorist organization Hamas against Israel, and developments regarding that hospital strike from a couple of days ago, where there was a blast at a hospital that the Palestinian authorities say has killed several hundred civilians. And more we are seeing intelligence demonstrate that it was Islamic Jihad, likely, that shot a missile, and it was a misfire, a rocket, and it was a misfire, and at least a piece of it hit down to this hospital, causing the destruction, and that it was not Israel. Now the U.S. government is saying exactly that, bolstering the claims of Israel's IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. Now, that has not stopped the likes of Rashida Tlaib from continuing to push out and perpetuate this myth that, it was Israel. And not trying to correct the record or anything. Quite the opposite. It is not surprising, but it remains astonishing. So we have much to discuss regarding Israel today. Plus, Jim Jordan has been defeated for the second time yesterday in his bid to become Speaker of the House. Colorado's own Congressman Ken Buck, of course, has voted no twice. He voted no on Tuesday in the first vote, was one of 20 Republicans to dissent. And yesterday was one of 22 Republicans to dissent. The number has grown. And reports from Politico, from the Washington Examiner, from elsewhere are in part that the way in which the Jordan camp has been attempting to advance his nomination has been the opposite of what a lot of Republicans want. That they're sort of being feeling like they're being browbeaten into supporting Jordan, pressured into supporting Jordan, as opposed to being along for the ride. You can think about what Kevin McCarthy did early on in January. He negotiated, he made deals, he made promises about this. He went and made too many promises, perhaps. He maybe made some promises that he could not keep. But fundamentally, he worked behind the scenes to negotiate, to try and reach deals. It doesn't seem like that's what Jordan is doing, and it is backfiring for a lot of Republicans. I don't know what the motivations are in that regard for Ken Buck, but it certainly is the case for a growing number of Republicans in the House. As for the congressman from Colorado's 4th Congressional District, well, here is what he had to say on CNN about his no vote on Jordan.
I also am concerned about January 6th and Jim's involvement in that or non-involvement. We had some conversation tonight. I want to go check some things and then ask him some more questions about that tomorrow. And then finally, the spending level is an issue that I care about. We are really, nobody believes me, but we have an existential crisis in this country over spending, and we need to make sure we get that under control.
Let me ask you on the second point, what could Congressman Jordan say to you to convince you to vote yes, particularly on January 6th? I mean, that seems like it's set in stone, whatever he did or did not do, or, support for an election or not. What could he do now?
I think it's really important that the Republican Party state unequivocally that President Trump lost the 2020 election. I think it's important that we recognize what happened on January 6th, and Jim does. When we talked tonight, he absolutely recognized that January 6th was a disaster. It was terrible. There's no excuse for it. But the events leading up to January 6th, I think, are important for us to just get our hands around, and for Jim and all of us to say that this isn't the way we want to conduct business in the future.
So if Jordan were to say Donald Trump lost the election, you would be a yes vote?
I would get closer to yes.
And it's interesting hearing Ken Buck explain his resistance to voting for Jim Jordan. We'll talk more about this later, although feel free to get in the conversation now, 303-696-1971, on what you think. I have to say, I'm cool with Jim Jordan as Speaker. There's a lot that I like about the guy, but my issue or concern is the better word, is I don't know that he's got what it takes to be the Speaker of the House in terms of those leadership skills. It's not like he has a tremendously successful track record on legislation of bringing fellow Republicans, let alone Democrats, along for the ride on passing legislation. He does not have that, which is one issue. I also think that he is somebody who excels in the spotlight. He's great on TV. He's excellent in those Judiciary Committee hearings where he is the chairman of the committee and really just lets it rip in a tremendous way. It's impressive when Jim Jordan goes on and has that opportunity. But is that the same as bringing the skill set for Speaker of the House? I don't know. I've been wrestling with that a little bit. Now, that doesn't seem to be anything in the calculus for Ken Buck. I don't know about the other 22 that voted no yesterday, but there are some questions that I have about Jim Jordan's capacity to be the Speaker of the House. Again, I'm cool with it. I like the guy. I'm fine with a Speaker Jordan, but the question is about efficacy, how effective a speaker can be in rallying the troops, as it were, in getting things done and making an impact, particularly when it comes to legislatively. Perhaps you disagree. Perhaps you think he has all of the traits to rally folks behind him and to be effective as Speaker of the House. Maybe we need a different kind of speaker right now. Maybe we need a speaker who can get out there and on TV really fight the rhetorical fight over the next year. I don't know. When we've got a war in Israel and we've got the fiscal crisis that we have right now with, before we know it, we'll be at $40 trillion in debt, and we have to get these appropriation bills done. And of course, we're looking at the prospect of a government shutdown, which previously the American people were ready to blame the Democrats, were ready to blame Biden. Will that be the case if these discussions about what to do about the fiscal state are postponed for several weeks because Republicans can't get their act together and select a speaker or figure out what to do as far as leadership is concerned, and then find themselves in a position where the shutdown happens and Republicans get blamed, and it has little to nothing to do with the actual fiscal issues that are in play, the concerns that led several members of the House to oust McCarthy, including Ken Buck? I don't know. I think there are a lot of issues at play. What do you think? 303-696-1971. Let's go to Joe in Arvada. Good morning, Joe. Been a while. How you been?
Good. How are you, Jimmy?
Doing good.
Jimmy, the real issue is not about any of these issues. It's about the fact that Jim Jordan is a real conservative, and Kevin McCarthy never was, and neither is Ken Buck. Ken Buck is a flip-flopper extraordinaire. I look at what's happened. He has gone over to CNN to, capitalize on his popularity now in the Democrat Party. Great, Ken. Why don't you just drop out to CNN now?
So let me ask you a question, Joe. How do you define a real conservative?
Okay, a real conservative like Jim Jordan is one who stands upon their principles and actually fights for it. And if there are differences,
but that's not what a conservative. But no, Joe. That's not my question. That's not my question. My question was not: is he willing to fight for his principles? Conservative means a philosophy, an ideology, doesn't it? So, what is a real conservative?
I noticed the non-conservative bent of your station has a tendency to interrupt real conservatives.
Hey, Joe.
Here's the point.
Joe, I asked you a question. It's not your show. I asked you a question.
I'm going to answer it.
Are you going to answer the question?
Let me speak.
Go ahead. I'm going to let you go.
Speak?
Joe, I'm going to give you one more time. If you answer the question, you can go ahead and speak. Come on, brother. What is a true conservative? What is a real conservative?
I'm answering it. A true conservative is one who actually fights for their principles and doesn't flip-flop because of CNN money or the military-industrial complex money. That is the problem with
that is
Ken
not
Buck.
an answer to my question, because a conservative liberals fight for their principles, right? Socialists fight for their principles. What does that mean? Does that mean that you're a socialist too if you're a Republican who fights for principles?
Just a moment. As a perfect example of what you're saying, liberals flip-flopped on the military-industrial complex once it started feeding them the money.
Joe,
you see, that's the difference between
a real conservative. You didn't define a real conservative.
I'm telling you,
I'll give you one more chance to define what conservative means.
I'm answering you, but you're not listening.
No, you're not answering me.
Yes, I am.
I don't think you're listening to the question, Joe.
Okay, then shut up.
You know what, Joe? I think you're not going to answer the question. Have a great morning. Because you know what? If you're asked a question that is simple, what is a real conservative? The answer is not, well, you're fighting for your principles. Because again, go to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Go to Juan Marcano. Go to Tim Hernandez. Go to Tay Anderson. They're all fighting for their principles. If the definition of conservative is fighting for your principles, then doesn't that mean any of those liberals are somehow conservatives? We're already getting the blood flowing a little bit this morning. It's great. A real conservative is somebody who believes in the principles of limited government, personal responsibility, and strong national defense. Those are the three core pinnacles. The question is not about fighting or not. Any Republican who was out there fighting then can be described as a real conservative, yet some are described as rhinos by the people who are somehow the arbiter of real conservative, who don't even understand what conservative means, except They'll fight. It's all a circular argument. If you don't actually address the ideological question, it is a circular argument. Is he a fighter? Great. So he's a conservative. But he fights for the wrong things, so he's not a conservative. But a conservative is a fighter. So I don't understand. I'm not following. Maybe Winston has a better answer to this question about what a real conservative is. Good morning, Winston. How are you?
I don't know. I'm listening to the guy before me, and I'm not sure what to think. I was just telling Wild Bill I don't understand because I'm 72, 73 next week. And what I thought was a conservative believed in the values that this country was founded on, period. That's
Yes.
what I think.
And what
And
are a couple of those values?
Well, a right to free speech, the right to assembly, peaceful. And Jimmy, before you were born, I think CBS brought out what do you call it? One of those first questionnaires they had about what we were allowed to do under the Constitution. I think this was in the 60s, I believe.
Okay.
I was in college at CSU, and of course, people were burning stuff. And before that, I was at Kent State as a freshman, I was near Kent State when everybody got shot. And you asked me what a conservative is, and honestly, today, I don't know. I mean, candidly, I live in Florida now and Buffalo, Wyoming, part of the time. And Jim, there are people that say they're conservative. Like I like the guy that's running for Speaker of the House, Jim Jordan.
Sure.
But I also like what Matt Gaetz said on Jason Whitlock. And I don't know if you're familiar with either one. But
I'm familiar with both. I don't know what Gates said, but
Gates was saying, look, he believes in the principles of the country and that Congress shouldn't have a free check to spend money like, pardon me, drunken sailors. I was cut off yesterday because I was by Peter, my hero, because I said a four-letter word and I didn't realize it was, FCC politically correct.
Yeah, you got to be careful with the language there. Yeah. That's for sure. But Winston, let me say this. To me, at a fundamental level, I said limited government, personal responsibility, strong national defense. It all comes down to one fundamental value and idea, which is that government is created and intended for one sole purpose, which is to protect the inherent, inalienable, God-given rights of each and every individual. And that doesn't mean providing all the benefits and goodies that some people want from social welfare programs. It means a limited confines of what government is supposed to be.
Right.
And that's the essence of what a conservative is.
Now, wait, you said something that's very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Personal responsibility. Take ownership of your actions.
That's right.
I grew up in New Mexico, which is a very, very poor state. And my family, my dad was a professional. My mother was involved in politics. It drove my father crazy. But to be candid with you, there was a lot of personal stability back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then it started to kind of go away. And then everybody was playing the blame game. And, oh, by the way, I grew up terrible and my family mistreated me. All this other happy horse manure that I think is a crock of social BS.
Fair enough.
And I just think that, we've gotten away. We've had 3 or 4 generations of children that have no idea what personal responsibility is.
Winston, I got to run, but I think that I have a few theories about why this is the case. Number one, I think that as society has advanced, our technology's gotten better, our quality of life has improved. We've had the opportunity to become lazier, and we're wealthier as a society and able to rely upon others. That's a big piece. Another piece is the Great Society of the 1960s that LBJ heralded in, that had disincentivized folks from working, discouraging productive behavior in that regard.
Exactly. Well, listen, you and I are on the same page. You have a great day, and thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Winston. I also want to add, though, that this also includes a decline in sort of the moral ethos of our society, and also, just in general, the church's roles have declined as they have sort of, with the exception of the Catholic Church. And I don't mean this categorically, but broadly speaking, the church has been less involved in providing the kinds of services that now government provides. And I think there was sort of an openness to government stepping in and the church stepping back in that regard. So there are several reasons why we've seen a decline in personal responsibility. I think those are a few of them. But Jim Jordan, is he the right guy for speaker? Is he a real conservative? I think he is. But is he a real conservative in a way that justifies him being the Speaker of the House? Is that enough? Or does he need to bring more to the table? 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. We're already off to the races, revved up and ready to go for the rest of the program. Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brockler right here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Say goodbye to clutter and hello to convenience when you experience organization transformation in your home. Roll 'em Out Shelves, your clutter transformation experts, create affordable Colorado-crafted organized storage solutions. These custom options will maximize and organize your kitchen and bath storage as Roll 'em Out Shelves carefully designs and builds roll-out drawers to fit your space perfectly to clear the clutter. Contact owners Joyce and Brent at Roll 'em Out Shelves to schedule your free in-home estimate today. Say good.
Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler today and tomorrow. 710 KNUS. Is Jim Jordan the definition of a real conservative? What is your standard for that? And is it sufficient? And is being a fighter sufficient to leading as Speaker of the House? Let me just say again, for those just joining us, that I don't have a beef with Jim Jordan. I'm cool with the Speaker, Jordan. I like Jim Jordan, but I'm not sure that he meets the necessary qualifications. And I don't mean the on-paper qualifications. Anybody in the country could be the Speaker of the House if the House votes him to be. Bill Thorpe, Billy, could be the Speaker of the House. Now, he'd be absolutely insane, literally, to take such a job. I think just about anybody would. But nevertheless, theoretically, he could. What I mean in terms of qualifications is this a person who has a legislative track record of accomplishment that shows he can rally folks behind legislation and get it done? Jim Jordan doesn't have that track record. Jim Jordan also is exceptionally good on TV, especially as somebody who is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, is known for being sort of a bomb thrower. And why I say in this case, not in a negative way, because what he's really doing is getting out there and fighting the fight and putting out his views and making it known very clearly on television. And they're very targeted as well when he makes his points known. The other thing that Jordan does is when he's chairing the Judiciary Committee. You got to love watching the Judiciary Committee when he's got a star witness of some kind that he's just absolutely grilling. You can't do that as Speaker of the House. You lose Jim Jordan and the asset that he brings in those Judiciary Committee hearings when he's able to grill the guy in front of him. But those are also the things where he excels on TV in making these points and in driving them home. But when it comes to the leadership qualities, I'm not so sure that he fits the bill. But then there's the question of what is a real conservative? Is he, as Joe from Arvada suggested in the last segment with no explanation, though, as to why, is he the definition of a real conservative? And he may well be. I tend to think he is a real conservative. Does he define real conservative? Probably not. But who does in this day and age define real conservative anyway? Is it talk radio hosts? Is it Donald Trump? Is it Jim Jordan? Is it Ken Buck? Is it Nancy Mace? Who is it? Is it good old Ronald Reagan from the grave who helps define conservatism? I tend to think Reagan is actually a phenomenal barometer for what a real conservative is. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number if you'd like to join in to the festivities. And you can text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. Listener text coming in. By the way, name and town if you wish to text in, please. An unknown listener, unnamed listener, texting in, Joe doesn't get it. The Republicans are going to lose the House. Look, with this kind of dysfunction, I think there's a good possibility of that, especially in this political environment, even though Joe Biden is a terrible president, even though the Democrats are in Looney Tune land. If there is a perception of dysfunction, just look in Denver. At Denver Public Schools, one of the prime examples of dysfunctional governance, Mayor Mike Johnston yesterday just announced that he was endorsing the 3 candidates who were not backed by the union. John Youngquist for the at-large position, Marlene De La Rosa for District 5, and in District 1, I believe, Kimberly Sia. None of those are incumbents either, and there are 2 incumbents who are running. when the mayor of Denver feels compelled to endorse somebody, 3 candidates who are not backed by the union, and he's a Democrat, not backed by the teachers union, and against 2 incumbents, you know something's up. And that kind of dysfunction is known by the public, and so politicians like a Mike Johnston will react to that. Isn't the same thing possible for Republicans in the dysfunctional House? And is it somehow anathema to the Republican Party or conservative principles to say, to admit, to acknowledge that, yes, the House GOP is dysfunctional? I mean, frankly, I'm at the point where I don't know which is more dysfunctional, the Denver School Board, the House GOP, or the Colorado GOP. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. We have listener text coming in from Nebraska, Jacqueline, saying Jim Jordan is probably the closest thing we have to a real conservative in Washington. We also have a listener text coming in saying most people on both sides don't like the flamethrower. Got one already in Trump. Jordan has passed 0 bills since being in the House in a million years. I guess that's 10. I think it's like 10, 12 years. That's a leader. 303-696-1971. Let's go to Frank in Denver. Good morning, Frank.
I think I want Sengenberger for Congress.
You know, you will not get your wish, my friend, but I appreciate the sentiment. What's on your mind this morning?
You sound, I don't know if you heard him, but I was going to ask you if you did and if you agreed with Charlie Kirk yesterday. He sounds almost exactly like what you were saying. And he was saying and putting down the Republicans that the Republicans don't seem to know how to take control, get together for what they want, to do something for the country. With their slim majority that they have, they need to do what they can rather than the infighting and the arguing about little bitty points. And so he was saying that Republicans are totally happy to be in second place and just kind of complain all the time but never get anything done, whereas the Democrats seem to organize and put forth their crazy agenda for the slow disassembling of the country. Pretty sad.
You know, but I would tend to agree with that analysis. We might, Charlie and I, disagree on how we get to that analysis, but I do think that there is something to be said, and we see it here in Colorado. I think the leaders of the Colorado GOP right now are more interested in just barking up a tree about the Democrats than in actually trying to accomplish something. That, by being bombastic and bringing the fight to the Democrats in a rhetorical sense, that's all you really need to do. And I think that's way off base. You actually need to have goals and objectives that you are trying to achieve, and fighting for the sake of fighting isn't enough. And in some cases, I do think that there's sort of this complacency among Republicans who are like, you know what, it's easier to just argue and be the dissenters, or to just get on TV and spout what we want to spout, than it is to actually lead and accomplish things.
I'm afraid we do have a dysfunctional Congress, because in today's social media world, where anybody can be docked or mocked or torn down or criticized, bringing up stuff back to their childhood, you know, it's almost like people are afraid individually to introduce anything for which they might come under the heat and lose their position that they ran for, rather than, like the Dems, going behind closed doors, getting their unified front, presenting it, and just voting on it. And the opposition doesn't know who to criticize. So the Republicans need to be a lot smarter. Otherwise, we're just not going to get anything done.
Yeah.
The country keeps stumbling along,
and here's the thing, Frank. The biggest problem with dysfunction in a political sense is that it leads to lost elections. Like I was just saying in the example of Denver public schools and the blowback there, and the probable consequences that you could have 2 incumbents voted off the island because of the dysfunction, not necessarily because of themselves, but because of the dysfunction of the entire board. That creates a perception, and people say, you know what? They have control of the House, and they can't even get their own ship in gear and on the ocean floating in a direction that they can agree upon.
Like Pete says, two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead.
There you go.
You know, it's really sad though, Jimmy, because it's an ineffective, dysfunctional thing that has a high degree of responsibility for helping to run this country. And it's almost like half of your callers could do a better job. What was it? Bill Buckley said the first 437 or whatever number names in the New York phone book could do a better job than the elected group we have now, because they seem to have so much at stake that people can attack and hold them prisoner.
Yeah, no, I think you're raising some good and important points, Frank. By the way, it would be 435.
435
is the number that you would get in Congress. So I really appreciate it, Frank. Thanks so much for calling in.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
303-696-1971, our telephone number. Listener text coming in. Look at Johnston. That's Mayor Mike Johnston's record in the state Senate. He passed the bills that weren't teacher friendly and made it easier to get rid of teachers. So it's not surprising. Yes, he did. I don't know that I would characterize them as not teacher friendly, except insofar as they added new accountability measures in there that would say, okay, we are going to be boosting and changing how teachers are held accountable, how the assessments are approached, and so forth. What was that bill? I wanted to say 217, but it's escaping me what the bill was. But there was one that really was all about accountability. But regardless, it's true that he has that kind of record on education, so it fits. But he could have just stayed silent. He did not need to endorse anybody. He could have just taken a step back and said, I want the people of Denver to decide the future here, and then I will speak up when I think something needs to be said. But he didn't. He decided to get into the fray, and I think that is because the dysfunction is so bad, and he recognized, you know what? It will be to my political advantage to play into this race. Well, these three races in Denver. We got to run to a break. Our telephone number 303-696-1971. Keep the text going as well on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. Name in town if you wish to text in. Keep it here. Jimmy in for George on 710 KNUS. Coming back, Jimmy Sengenberger here with you in for George Brockler, Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Coming up at the top of the hour, my good friend Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, hailing from Stoughton, Massachusetts, will join me to talk about the rising scourge of anti-Semitism in our country and what's happening over in Israel and Gaza right now. Deeply disturbing. We have much to discuss there. And tomorrow we will have a retired brigadier general offering insights. Doug Slocum will join us, 35-year Air Force veteran and fighter pilot, and again, brigadier general. He will be joining us in the 7 a.m. hour tomorrow to offer his perspective and breakdown on what's happening as well. Will be phenomenal insights. Don't miss it. So we are talking, though, this hour, and we will again return to this subject as well later on, about the Speaker of the House battle that is going on right now. Jim Jordan trying to get the votes, but he lost 2 more in yesterday's vote. On Tuesday, there were 20 dissenters. Yesterday, there were 22 dissenters. It's not a good indication that you could become the Speaker of the House if you continue to slide in that sort of a direction. That is to say, in the direction of losing support as opposed to gaining support when you need it in order to win. And there are a variety of reasons I'm sure that that's in play, but one of these is strong-arm tactics that Republican members of the House are alleging against Jordan, and particularly Jordan's team. Read the Washington Examiner on the right or Politico on the left. They are both saying the same thing and showing the frustrations here. Say what you will about McCarthy, what he did in January, he overpromised, including saying, in his case, one member can go ahead and put forward a motion to vacate that we all have to vote on. Ended up getting that guy canned from his position as Speaker. But McCarthy worked to negotiate, to figure out what deals could he make. Instead, we have reports that Jordan's team is trying to sort of pummel Republicans into getting on board or using the conservative infrastructure from the Colorado GOP yesterday, sending out an email saying, call Ken Buck's office. Yay Lamborn, yay Boebert, call Buck because he's wrong and we need him to support Jim Jordan. To Conservative Talk Radio being asked to jump into play and get these Republicans pressured into voting yes. Here's the thing about Republicans. That doesn't work. The Democrats fall in line. Pelosi was the master at this. They get it together. Republicans don't. If you encroach upon their sense of independence, you make things worse. We see that all over in the Republican Party and right here in Colorado. So that's not a good sign for Jordan's leadership, nor is the fact that he hasn't passed any significant legislation. When you're the Speaker of the House, that's the driving goal, right? Now, again, that's not to say that I dislike Jordan. I'm a Jim Jordan fan, especially when he's in the Judiciary Committee kicking butt or when he's on TV exposing things like the reality of Hunter Biden or some judicial issues or what have you. He's a tremendous asset. And I'm cool with Speaker Jordan if he becomes Speaker. But I think that we are seeing some real issues that can spell more difficulties for Republicans moving forward. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number for later on in the show when we return after talking with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. A listener text that came in earlier when Joe had said that Ken Buck flip-flopped. Jimmy, did not Ken Buck flip-flop on a bunch of issues? Agreeing with that sentiment. I don't know specifically what issues Ken Buck flip-flopped on. I think when you look at the strength of his arguments and some things, perhaps. I mean, I'm not a fan of his per se of the way he's gone about big tech. All right. I just noticed we are running to a break here. I didn't see that. We'll be back. Jimmy in for George. Time now for the second hour of the George Show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler today and tomorrow, right here on News Talk 710 KNUS. And then, of course, a third day of 6 a.m. with the Jimmy Sengenberger Show coming up on Saturday morning. We're shifting gears here now to both national and international and what has been happening in Israel and Gaza. Of course, we are about a week and a half, little more, almost 2 weeks, if I can do math, away from when Hamas, the jihadist terrorist organization in Gaza, attacked Israel in the most brutal assault against Jews that we have seen for a single day since the Holocaust. They paraglided Hamas terrorists to a music festival, slaughtering 260 innocent people and kidnapping many others. Children have been abducted and murdered. Women have been abducted and raped. The situation overseas is perilous. President Biden in Israel yesterday reiterated his support for the people of Israel and showed that support in part as well by acknowledging that it was Hamas allies, Islamic Jihad, that appeared to be responsible, specifically that organization. We know it was not Israel that was responsible for the blast that happened at a hospital in Gaza a couple of days ago. That some in Congress, including anti-Semite Rashida Tlaib, refuse still to this day to acknowledge the truth that Israel was not responsible. And U.S. intelligence shows this and also indicates that it was Islamic Jihad that was responsible for it. Also in the last day or two, Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, was meeting with the chancellor of Germany, and he said point blank, Hamas is the new Nazis.
This is the savagery of that we only remember from the Nazi crimes of the Holocaust. Hamas are the new Nazis. Hamas is ISIS, in some instances worse than ISIS. And just as the world united to defeat the Nazis, just as the world united to defeat ISIS, the world has to stand united behind Israel to defeat Hamas.
And meanwhile, there's a rise in anti-Semitic incidents here in our country. We've seen New York University students, for example, going around tearing down posters with the names and pictures of innocents who have been kidnapped in Gaza, tearing them down brazenly. And the list goes on. Glad to be rejoined this morning to discuss all of these happenings by my good friend out of Stoughton, Massachusetts, the rabbi at Ahavath Torah congregation in Stoughton. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman returns here on 710 KNUS. My friend, I didn't expect to invite you on this station again. Just over a month since the last time I talked with you, but alas, here we are with a very precarious situation. Welcome back.
Oh, precarious.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it, isn't it?
That is a very calm way of putting it, I think, because, listen, and Jimmy, and thank you for having me back on. I really do appreciate it. It's a welcome diversion with regard to everything else I'm involved with, as you know, off-air conversation.
Of course.
Listen, in terms of this unbridled Jew hatred, the only way I can start this conversation is by saying this all reminds me of what my maternal grandparents used to share when we would ask them what life was like back in Tsarist Russia. That prompted them, both my grandmother and my grandfather, to say, enough's enough, moving to America. And I distinctly remember, my grandfather describing the unbridled and wanton and government-inspired destruction of Jews, Jewish towns, Jewish communities throughout the Pale, what was called the Pale of Settlement, the greater part of which would today be located in the Ukraine. And my grandmother, and as a matter of fact, my grandfather said that the Kishinev pogrom in 1903 was for him the final straw that said, I have to leave. And when his father, my great grandfather, who came to the United States to actually be a blacksmith in Omaha, Nebraska, had amassed enough money, he went back to Russia, and my grandfather walked to Germany, missed the boat, and then walked down to what is today Dubrovnik on the Aegean to catch a boat to the United States. My grandmother distinctly remembers, as an 8-year-old, stealing across the border into what was Germany with Cossacks chasing her, her brother, and my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, across the border. And stories about the raping and the pillaging and the burning and all that. I mean, this is, as I said to my synagogue this past Saturday, we had a Unity with Israel Shabbat. As I said to him, we heard stories about pogroms, but now you see one. This is what it looks like. It's no longer, for those of us who had grandparents and heard these stories, it's no longer pictures in a book anymore. It's up close. It's live, and not without reason. This is not the first time we've seen these kinds of jihadist-inspired attacks. I mean, think about what happened in Sinjar to the Yazidis.
Yeah. Well,
not so different, but the actual desecration of bodies of Jews, I think, has just taken this to a much different level this time.
Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, our guest, I think what you're getting at here is not only is this nothing new, but it is a long-standing story of history. You have in the past referenced this rising Jew hatred as the constantly mutating virus because it shifts and changes forms depending on what era of history you're in. Today, it seems to be in the form of, this is all anti-colonialist and we're trying to oppose oppression. And that's how you get a lot of Americans who are getting into that anti-Semitic territory under the guise of, or maybe even genuinely thinking, I'm just being anti-occupation, anti-oppression, anti-colonialist. What do you make of that aspect of this, especially as we see, Rabbi, across the country, from New York University to Harvard to the University of Pennsylvania to all over, the rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric in this country?
But it's not just anti-Semitic rhetoric, and you're absolutely correct. Here in Boston, you have Harvard, you have Tufts, you have Boston University. There were these paroxysms that are taking place. The entire university system of the City University of New York, CUNY, okay, you have the second largest or the third largest public university system in the country. Almost all 25 of its campuses infected with this, okay? University of Pennsylvania, by the way, my wife's alma mater. Harvard had a huge, actually, before I get to that piece. So University of Pennsylvania, University of South Florida, Berkeley, UCLA, and college campuses in between. And it's not just the college campuses here, college campuses in Canada and what's happening over in the United Kingdom as well. Only now are donors, and not necessarily Jewish donors, by the way, are waking up, seeing what's happening, in the academy, as it were, and saying, wait a minute, you mean the millions, the tens of millions, the hundreds of millions of dollars that I or my foundations have been donating to Harvard and Penn and whatnot?
Right.
This is what this is what it's going for. So, the Wexner Foundation. I don't know if you know who the Wexner Foundation is, but if you don't, I'll tell you who they are. Have you ever seen the stores 9 West or J. Jill? That's the Wexners.
Yeah,
That's the Wexner
Victoria's
family.
Secret and Bath and Body Works. Yeah, that was all the limited brands.
That's right. That's right. Jewish family out of Columbus, Ohio. They had the foundation had a huge connection to Harvard. And literally the foundation just said, the beginning of this week, we're turning off the spigots. Former ambassador and former governor, John Huntsman, all right, not Jewish. He just said to University of Pennsylvania, it's his alma mater. He said, we're done. Okay. Ronald Lauder, all right, heir to the Estee Lauder Foundation. Okay. Former president, I think he may still even be the current president of the World Jewish Congress, turning off the spigots. And this is what has to happen for people who donate large, I think donate small as well, need to turn off the spigots.
Yeah.
And this blatant, and since you brought this up, I mean, we really should talk about the blatant anti-Semitism on college campuses. It has shocked Americans across the board.
Well, and Rabbi, this is the one kind of, we hear all these, anti-hate, and you can't be, we want to do all these seminars and different workshops and different things about anti-blackness and all this. But somehow there seems to be a tolerance for Jew hatred on college campuses. It's like that's the exception.
Without question. And listen, since this is the one show that I know I can speak freely about these things, I'm going to do it. You see anti-Semitism on a weekly basis on college campuses across the country, emanating much of it from this diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect of it. It seems to be a toxic ideology deliberately that stokes hatred toward Israel and the Jewish people, far in excess of any other group on campus. Okay. What boxes do you check, et cetera, to the exclusion of Jews? If you're going to think about DEI, what you really want is an inclusive learning environment, but that's not what it happens.
Exactly.
Toxic form. It's, what you want to know what it really should be called. Now that I'm talking about this, it really should be called critical social justice, which means, in effect, it becomes the opposite of what it's supposed to do and what it's supposed to.
Yes. Oh, exactly. There was a very interesting piece, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, in the Wall Street Journal. You might have seen it a couple of days ago. The headline, "Don't Hire My Anti-Semitic Law Students," by Stephen Davidoff Solomon, who's a law professor at the University of California, Berkeley. And he said, quote, "If you don't want to hire people who advocate hate and practice discrimination, don't hire some of my students. Anti-Semitic conduct is nothing new on university campuses, including here at Berkeley." That is a startling sentence to read from a college professor, an admission.
Right. And I will tell you something, at least there are some college professors that are standing up and writing those things and saying those things. And it's not just him. There are the silk stocking law firms in New York who are revoking job offers to some of these people involved and what's taking place. One of the 31 or 34 student groups that are advocating for Israel's elimination up at the Harvard campus. There are people whose jobs offers are being withdrawn. The head of the Student Bar Association at NYU, last name of Workman, I think, if I remember correctly from the reports, her job offer was withdrawn because of some of this stuff. But it's that. There were stories about schools. And actually, this was actually happened at a university right down the street from where I live. I don't know how many people out in the Denver area know this, but in Greater Boston, we have 35 universities and research universities here. Okay, so there's one literally down the street from where I live. I got a call last year. They wanted to have a Hanukkah party. And okay, fine. Well, Rabbi, will you come and be the rabbi there? Okay, fine. But before I said, it sounds good, but tell me about the program. Do you know, Jimmy, there was going to be no Hanukkah imagery at the program. None. So I said,
At a Hanukkah party?
So what? Yeah, figure this one out. I said, who's going to come to this? And they started telling me. I said, listen, I'm not the rabbi for you to do this. It was very clear that what they were trying to do was something that trying to bastardize, as it were, what Hanukkah was all about. And I just didn't want to have any part of it. Student bodies. My alma mater is the George Washington University. Actually, I have 3 alma maters. That's one of them. I have 2 degrees from GW. Okay. The student senate on the eve of Passover of 4 or 5 years ago passed a resolution advocating boycott, divest, and sanction from Israel. Divest from Israel on the eve of Passover.
I want to jump in real quick because we're just about out of time here for this segment. We'll keep you. Briefly, in a minute, connect the idea of anti-Zionism or anti-Israeli rhetoric to anti-Semitism. How can they be one and the same? Because there are those who would want to make the distinction and say, no, I'm just critical of Israel's policy. This is not a judgment on Jews in any way.
Yeah, right. Sure. Okay. What ends up happening is they treat Israel to a different standard, just like they treat the Jew to a different standard. But what they do is they take this anti-Zionism tact and say it's much more socially acceptable to wrap it up in that kind of language. But it still vilifies Jews. It still segregates Jews. It still it creates this illusion. You want to know what it is? It's taking this anti-Jewish animus, as it were, and focusing it strictly on Israel. So Israel, as a country, becomes the Jew of the world, rather than the individual Jews themselves.
That's
and it perpetuates and it perpetuates the same language, the same conspiracy-ridden language regarding economics, regarding faith, regarding theology, as focusing on the individual. Well, now you're focusing on the state.
As we go to a break, I know you read a column that I wrote last week about Tim Hernandez, our anti-Semitic state representative who's shown sympathies for Hamas. And one of the things that he went and tweeted out was this quote that he falsely attributed to Golda Meir, the prime minister of Israel, the first and only, to this point, female prime minister of Israel from 1969 to 1974. And she was the PM during
there was another female prime minister.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So the first, she was the prime minister during the Yom Kippur War. And the quote that he shared on social media back in 2021, by the way, a couple of years ago, said what was about this burning of the Al-Aqsa Mosque when it was put on fire in Jerusalem. And it was by a 28-year-old Australian non-Jew who lit it. But this idea perpetuated by Hernandez was that it was Israel. And supposedly she said, according to this false fabricated quote that he shared, when we burnt Al-Aqsa Mosque, I did not sleep the whole night for fear of Arab armies entering Israel from all around. But when the sun rose the next morning, I came to know we can do anything we want, for we are facing a Muslim Ummah nation which is asleep. She never said that quote, and it includes numerous anti-Semitic canards just in there, supposedly about Israel, but really about Jews. Real quick.
And I'll tell you real quick. If you go to Palestinian Media Watch, which is a media watch group, as it were, that deals with these kinds of quotes that come out from people like Tim Hernandez, they completely eviscerate this as the falsity that it is.
Yeah.
What ended up happening was the Al-Aqsa Mosque was set on fire by that non-Jew Australian. And Golda Meir convened a cabinet meeting to allocate money to repair the mosque. That's what ended up happening.
The exact opposite. It is astonishing. Rabbi Jonathan.
Yeah, but it's not the first time.
No, far
that
from
these
it.
kinds of canards have been thrown up. Right.
Far from it. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, our guest, is the rabbi at Ahavath Torah congregation in Stoughton, Massachusetts. He'll stay with us on the other side as we continue. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler right here on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUN.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Say goodbye to clutter and hello to convenience when you experience organization transformation in your home. Roll 'em Out Shelves, your clutter transformation experts, create affordable Colorado-crafted organized storage solutions. These custom options will maximize and organize your kitchen and bath storage as Roll 'em Out Shelves carefully designs and builds roll-out drawers to fit your space perfectly to clear the clutter. Contact owners Joyce and Brent at Roll 'em Out Shelves to schedule your free
My thanks to Bill Thorpe for plugging in this SRV bumper tune. Little tune called Crossfire that I thought was apropos of our discussion, especially when we have Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, my good friend out of Stoughton, Massachusetts, who is a big blues aficionado himself. And you know what, Rabbi? Had he been alive today, Stevie Ray Vaughan would have just celebrated his 69th birthday earlier this month.
I got news for you. With everything going on, were you alive today? I would invite him to play at the synagogue.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. You listen to him and you listen to that. I mean, listen, the four musicians in the band between Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble.
Yes.
Absolutely exquisite. Tommy Shannon's bass work, boy. I mean, he's just outrageous.
You know, Reese
outrageous.
Winans plays with Joe Bonamassa. I see him every year at Red Rocks, the best venue you can go for a concert. And he is better than ever now on the keys.
Yeah. And Chris Layton, he plays with Kenny Wayne Shepherd.
He does indeed. I saw him this summer as well. So may not get to see Stevie ever, but I do get to see others in Double Trouble, which is just a real treat.
You want to know something? Though this is off topic, of course, and what we're discussing is very heavy, with regard to the Middle East. All I can say is with regard to Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble, thank God for YouTube.
Yes. Amen, brother. Amen to that. Listener text.
There is a great clip I had my daughter listen to. Stevie Ray Vaughan, Double Trouble with Jimmy Vaughan at the New Orleans Jazz Fest, 1990.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. One of his last shows then.
You can find the entire set on YouTube. And the interesting thing is they start off by playing a Freddie King tune. So Stevie Ray Vaughan's playing, you see his brother in the background, and then he turns to his brother. His brother, Jimmy, steps up and starts to play exactly like Stevie Ray.
Wow.
And Stevie Ray Vaughan always said he said a number of things, but with regard to his brother, he said, and I quote, he said, I play 60% of what I know. My brother plays 10% what he knows.
Yeah. He always looked up to Jimmy. That's for sure. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, talk to me about the blues and Jews, especially from your perspective. And I ask this question particularly as we are seeing the Jewish people again live the blues as no other group has for as long as the Jews have.
Well, look, I mean, the blues are a musical journey through life, I mean, it's, and dealing with the ups and downs in life. And who was it? B.B. King said, the blues never go away. Well, it seems that the Jewish historical experience is pretty much the same way. We are brutalized, we are hounded, we are subject to all kinds of imprecations and things of that sort. But, we take that, we use it as motivation, and we move on. And isn't that what the musical journey of the blues is all about?
Amen.
Making something out of sadness, making something out of nothing, moving along and creating in your life despite what's taking place around you.
Yeah, no, I think
one reason why I like the blues. It's not the only reason.
Well, it also just sounds phenomenal. I appreciate that, Rabbi. I think that is very well put. I want to get your response to reaction to a handful of clips that I have pulled, including one that I think was a very interesting observation from Bill Maher about these land acknowledgments that we hear. For example, Denver Public Schools, every school board meeting, they begin their meeting with a land acknowledgement. And he had something to say about that vis-a-vis Israel with the
colonizers. Okay, this has become like in the media, we just call the Israelis it's not a colonizing.
No.
But, okay, colonizer is when one country that had nothing to do with another country, like the British or the Dutch in South Africa, marched in with an army and took over a place that they had no connection to. Israel has quite a connection to Israel.
Jews are the...
Yes,
Yes, so many people commenting about this seem to have just started their understanding of it from 5 minutes ago. The Jews are the Native Americans of this piece of land.
Yes, if you did a land acknowledgement like we do in this country, where I'm standing on ground that was, I'm standing on ground that 3,000 years ago was King David's capital of Jerusalem.
It's important. Who does Hamas and many Palestinian sympathetic people, who do they refer to as settlers and colonizers? It's not just the Israelis living in the disputed West Bank. It's Israelis living anywhere within the internationally recognized borders of the state of Israel. Because to them, any Jew in that territory is considered a colonizer. And this language is used to dehumanize people and to license their murder. So it's really important that we understand what this
and if that land acknowledgement means like we honor who originally had the land, why does this work for Indians but not Jews?
I'm not sure who the other guy was in that conversation, but what do you make of that? I found it a rather interesting insight.
Well, it's not just an insight; it's historically true.
Yes,
you know,
indeed.
the Jews, the Jewish people, the only nation to have inhabited that area of the world, okay, as the indigenous population, the indigenous inhabitants of that part of the world. And it's not just Jerusalem, believe it or not. King David's first capital was in Hebron. Okay. We're called Jews because prior to the Roman expulsions of, during the first Roman war against the Jews, which ended in the year 74, and then the second Roman war against the Jews, which was the Bar Kokhba revolt, 132 to 135. We're called Jews because we originated from Judea, all right, the kingdom of Judah. And throughout history, people should also know that despite the expulsions and despite the Roman laws and the Byzantine laws and whatnot that restricted Jewish life, there was always an ongoing Jewish presence in the land of Israel completely. Now, it's interesting that this come up. And with regard to Bill Maher, I just want to say one thing. It's very interesting to me how people tell me that he's betrayed the left. Bill Maher is very much a very bright thinking kind of guy. And I'm not so sure that he was always on the left. At best, or at worst, depending upon your position, Bill Maher may be from the left, but he's not of the left.
Interesting.
I
agree with that.
I mean, frankly, I think he's, for lack of a better description, he is more what I would consider to be people who are approaching the classical liberal position in terms of political philosophy and how they view the world.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's good insight. I do want to get to a couple of other things. So if you have a point you want to wrap up with real quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna right. And so here's the point. I was asked during my adult ed class this Tuesday night, Rabbi, could you please explain how the Palestinians got to where they got to? And I said, listen, you need to understand, as Jews en masse began to return to the land of Israel, with the Bilu movement in the late 19th century and the waves of Aliyah, the waves of immigration that ended up coming in, you need to understand industry ends up forming, modern methods of farming end up being employed. You had work. And I said, if you take a look at the surnames of a lot of these people who claim to be Palestinian, you can tell where their families are originally from. You have people who say that they're Palestinians, but their last names are Al-Masri, which means they're from Egypt, or Al-Hurani, which means that they're Syrian. Or you'll even find them designated by their tribal last names, whatever the name is, Etakriti. They end up coming from Iraq. Okay, Baghdadi, they come from the Baghdad area. So you find this amongst a lot of the people who claim to be Palestinians, that they're indigenous to the area. They're not. With the advent of modern Zionism, political Zionism, listen, I'm not going to say that there weren't Arabs living in what was the governing of Palestine under the Ottoman Empire. There were, okay, but not the numbers that people are talking about. The figure about somewhere between 60 and 80,000 people, which was no different than, the Jewish population at the time as well. So
interesting. Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, our guest. I want to get your reaction to one other clip. This is specifically on the conflict overseas. That is really, it's well beyond a conflict. It is terrorism from the jihadis in Gaza, known as Hamas and Islamic Jihad, as well as Hezbollah, going after Israel with the most brutal attack against Jews that we've seen since the Holocaust. And here is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pressed on her calls for a ceasefire, calls that are echoed by the likes of anti-Semite Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar.
Well, I think what's important to note about a ceasefire is that it's not one-sided. Hamas has been sending thousands of rockets into Israel as well. And what is important is for us to identify our goal in terms of what safety means, in terms of what defense means.
But
and
if I may, Congresswoman, I think the position from Israel's perspective is that there was already an attack, and Hamas already committed an attack. After that happened, do you really believe that they should not respond to that?
I think what is important in terms of response is Israel does have a right to self-defense. I think what we need to take a look at in this situation is if collective punishment qualifies as defense, if the blockade on water, food, electricity, if the dropping of white phosphorus, which is an indiscriminate weapon, qualifies. So I do believe that there's a discussion to be had here. I don't believe that an either or approach is what is necessary, but we should identify what our goal is, which is the cooling of tensions in the region.
I don't have enough time to really let you get going on this, but in a minute and a half, your reaction.
You want me to be honest?
I've always.
She's an idiot. She's walking proof that a degree from Boston University means nothing. Okay, you understand the instinct, particularly when you're talking about prosecuting a war in a densely populated area like Gaza is. But you learn in places like Fallujah that there is a way to do it. And how do you prosecute a war when you have a government like Hamas, whose reason for existence is the elimination of the state of Israel, whose civilians who were hired to come across into Israel to work ended up drawing the maps that were used by those Hamas butchers to commit, as they entered Israel and to commit the grotesqueries that they committed. So, there are people who say, listen, there were all these people who are civilians. My question is, I'm not sure how many of them are civilians. There's no way to know. But what did Israel do? Israel issued an announcement to say, listen, if you're innocent, if you're a civilian, if you're a mother, if you have children, if you just want to work, begin to head to the south of Egypt.
Yeah.
Our borders here are closed.
Right.
We have, if we're at war, we have, in terms of international law, we don't have to, we are not obligated to provide you with the electricity, the water, the whatever else. That's up to you elected this government in 2007. It's not up to us to provide you with those kinds of human necessities. This is war.
Yeah.
This is war. And listen, people use a lot of analogies with regard to this. Can you imagine what would have happened if these arguments were used during World War II, during the the Allied bombing of Dresden, or the Nazi bombing of London?
Absolutely right. Just always love talking with you and getting your perspective, Rabbi Jonathan Hausman. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, my friend. God bless you and the state of Israel and the Jews.
Jimmy.
our Jewish friends.
My pleasure. Anytime.
You bet. We're going to take a break. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler, 710 KNUS. One of the things we call a short top of the hour segment as we wrap up this second hour of the George Show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler today as well as tomorrow from 6 to 10. My thanks to Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, who's always just a tremendous guest. Tomorrow we will speak during the 7 o'clock hour with retired Air Force Brigadier General Doug Slocum, a former tactical wing commander, a brilliant guy. I'm looking forward to getting his insights on the military side of what is happening in the war between Israel and Hamas right now. That should be a fascinating discussion. When we come back, 303-696-1971, our telephone number. Want to get your thoughts on what is happening in Israel, some of the rise in anti-Semitism and the points that Rabbi Hausman was making. We've got some sound worth hearing as well. Plus, Jim Jordan lost his second vote for speaker yesterday by a wider margin than on Tuesday. What does this mean for Republicans? And is he a real conservative? We've got that and much more coming up as we continue. Jimmy in for George, 710 KNUS. number 3, Jimmy Sengenberger here with you. News Talk 710 KNUS, filling in for George Brockler today as well as tomorrow from 6 to 10. It's going to be a warm handful of days before we start cooling off. I mean, pretty mind-blowing. It is October 19th. It's sunny today and 79 is the high. Tomorrow, 82 and sunny. Then we start getting a little cloudier as it drops to 75. And then by Tuesday, we are into the 60s, and it should start to cool off from there. Wild weather that we are having. We will be joined here in a bit by State Representative Ron Weinberg, who himself is Jewish and has family in Israel. We will get his perspective on what is happening. And look, I mean, we talked a little bit about it with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman in the last hour. And I mean, he powerfully and succinctly described Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as an idiot with what she's been saying, but also just in general. And, you know, I mean, if the shoe fits, wear it, right? Isn't that what they say? But some of the things that the squad has been saying and doing are just utterly astonishing. Here is an example. We played this clip in the last hour of AOC being pressed on her calls for a ceasefire, which we know what a ceasefire would really mean. Hamas gets to attack Israel. Israel doesn't respond.
Well, you know, I think what's important to note about a ceasefire is that it's not one-sided. Hamas has been sending thousands of rockets into Israel as well. And what is important is for us to identify our goal in terms of what safety means, in terms of what defense means.
But
and
if I may, Congresswoman, I think the position from Israel's perspective is that there was already an attack, and Hamas already committed an attack. After that happened, do you really believe that they should not respond to that?
I think what is important in terms of response is Israel does have a right to self-defense. I think what we need to take a look at in this situation is if collective punishment qualifies as defense, if the blockade on water, food, electricity, if the dropping of white phosphorus, which is an indiscriminate weapon, qualifies. So I do believe that there's a discussion to be had here. I don't believe that an either or approach is what is necessary, but we should identify what our goal is, which is the cooling of tensions.
Just unrelated to Israel pro tip, if you're doing an interview and being interviewed, don't say, Just, you can give acknowledgement, but that kind of verbal acknowledgement in that way, it's just, I think it shows insincerity, actually. And it also can be a little bit distracting, and it just bugs me. I don't think it's a good idea. But that aside, what she said, the substance of what AOC said was just nonsense and off base. And when she says, oh, well, a ceasefire isn't one-sided, well, yeah, tell that to Hamas. You really expect that they're going to abide by this and be all good with it? Oh, sure, maybe for a brief time, they'll be like, okay, we'll stop to give that impression. And then, boom, it's going to begin again. Remember, they're the ones who launched an unprovoked, brutal, barbarous attack. Slaughtering, abducting, and raping included among the crimes some 1,600 Israelis and others. Americans have been killed. Americans have been kidnapped. Canadians and other countries have had their citizens kidnapped or killed. People at a music festival, and the list goes on. Well, and then what about Israel's options in their anti-Hamas efforts? If she wants to essentially tie the hands of the Israelis, take a listen.
For Israel to deal with Hamas, which is a force that is actually detrimental to Palestinians.
Absolutely.
How else are they supposed to address a violent militant, say, terrorist group other than to go in there and take them on directly?
Well, when we talk about going in there, I think we should also keep in mind President Biden's statements as well about what the implications of potential ground invasion would be. This is an inherently complex situation. I do believe that Hamas needs to be dealt with.
But how, I think, is what I'm
and
trying
I
to
think
understand.
what we're trying to figure out right now is that this present situation of collective punishment and indiscriminate attack is one approach, but we are seeing the issues and the complications with that approach now. Can we target them in terms of intelligence? Is there precision? What are the options available? Are entirely up to the administration and for Israel to examine.
Notice the non-answer. She had no actual answer for what Israel could do or should do there. She wants them to operate differently, but when asked how they can function in her mind, she has no answer and no response. And yet lobs the criticisms anyway. Now, this is the same Congresswoman who also has previously voted against, well, I guess she voted present. She didn't want to take a position on funding from the U.S. for the Iron Dome, Israel's missile defense system that has been working very well overall in helping to provide security for the Jewish state. And CNN also pressed her on that issue.
Do you believe now that funding is essential? Would you vote for it today?
And to be clear, at that time, I had voted present on the Iron Dome funding because of what we had seen previously that year in terms of Netanyahu's decisions, which also resulted in the bombing of several buildings that contain media agencies, civilian targets. However, I do think that in this present moment, when we discuss support for Israeli defense systems, that is absolutely legitimate. I think it is absolutely something that whose support we can. So
you would vote yes today if it came to the United States Congress, additional funding for the Iron Dome?
I think if it was explicitly around that, I have concerns about white phosphorus. I have concerns about the respect for about human rights.
She would not say yes. She equivocated. She gave all that room. Oh, no, there are these other things that I am concerned about. When in the beginning, it sounded like she was leaning in that direction. Oh, yeah, I'd support. But then when asked, nope, not so fast. There are these other boxes that need to be checked. Now, keep in mind, she is part of the squad that includes Rashida Tlaib, who is herself flagrantly anti-Semitic. Same thing goes to Ilhan Omar, also part of the squad. And Tlaib was out there right away saying, oh, the Israelis bombed the hospital. And quickly intelligence started coming in. And folks online were breaking this down and from some entities and looking at the footage, looking at that was available, looking at drone imagery, looking at the location information right down to the latitude and longitude and so on and so forth. We're breaking these things down, showing what U.S. intelligence now confirms, which is that Israel was not responsible for the blast at the hospital and believes that it was Islamic Jihad that launched a rocket and a series of rockets, one of which misfired and hit the hospital. And look, this is also supported by a purported conversation that they had wiretapped as well. There's so much evidence there, and yet Tlaib has refused to change her tune and continues to insist that Israel was responsible, despite the evidence and the facts that clearly show otherwise. It is astonishing, though, but it is not surprising because they simply and totally and utterly want to blame Israelis, to blame Jews, and that's what they're doing, and they will not let up from that particular agenda. And it is just astonishing to see this coming out of the U.S. Congress. Now, what's interesting as well is they're also talking about, oh, we need to accept all these Palestinian refugees into the U.S. The United States should welcome those refugees from Palestine. And AOC says, oh, there's something to be said for the piece of, well, what about the Arab neighbors of the Palestinians? Why aren't they taking them? Well, there's something to be said for that, but we have a long-standing tradition of welcoming refugees, never mind the possible security threats that could be incumbent or present there. But to the question of why not the other Arab countries when it comes to refugees, well, this was interesting. King Abdullah of Jordan was speaking at a press conference after meeting with the Chancellor of Germany. And here's what he said about accepting Palestinian refugees in Jordan as well as Egypt.
On the issues of refugees coming to Jordan, and I think I can quite strongly speak on behalf not only of Jordan as a nation, but of our friends in Egypt, that is a red line. Because I think that is the plan by certain of the usual suspects to try and create de facto issues on the ground. No refugees in Jordan, no refugees in Egypt. This is a situation of humanitarian dimension that has to be dealt inside of Gaza and the West Bank, and not to try and push the Palestinian challenge and their future onto other people's shoulders.
What is he saying there? The King of Jordan is saying that's Gaza's problem. We shouldn't be bearing the burden and putting the issues of the Palestinians on our shoulders, even though we are their neighbors and historically have sort of been aligned with the Palestinian cause, as it were. And they also says that this is an attempt to, quote, try to create de facto issues on the ground. What does he mean by that? It's very curious language, but what is abundantly clear there is that Jordan and Egypt are refusing to welcome refugees themselves and to provide that kind of support. So why is it incumbent upon the United States? Why is Israel responsible for the Palestinian plight amidst Hamas's brutal attack? Not that they shouldn't be caring for the humanitarian issues. Absolutely. And they are. This is why Israel gives 24 hours notice saying there are going to be attacks. And this is something they always do. Hey, here's advance notice. Guess what, folks? That is 24 hours more advance notice than Israel got from Hamas on October 7th. But why aren't these Arab states being pushed? Or how about Iran, which is financing and backing and helping to spearhead what the jihadists are doing? How come Turkey and Qatar, that those two countries, how come they aren't involved in saying, okay, we want to get refugees and welcome them here into our country? Because we're supporting their cause. Why not? Well, because the issues are too much and too difficult and too precarious and too complicated and too risky for them to do it. That should say a lot about the dynamics here. And yet, the U.S. and Israel are the ones being put on the spot for accepting refugees, for addressing different issues related to the plight of the Palestinian people. It's quite astonishing, the perspectives and takes that we are getting these days. One listener text coming in via the 710 KNUS app. So why are they calling for ceasefire in Gaza but supporting the war in Ukraine? Wouldn't you think they'd want a ceasefire in both countries? It's interesting that you are pointing this out. For at least those who don't want a ceasefire in both. There are some who would like it in both. But I think that it goes to the animosity towards Israel and towards Jews that we were talking about with Rabbi Hausman. And that's undergirding their calls for a ceasefire in that situation versus Ukraine. I don't think that it is time for a ceasefire in either country. I mean, Ukraine needs to continue to fight to maintain its independence and to take back its country. As for Israel, well, they need to defend themselves and eradicate Hamas. This is much grander in scope than anything that they have dealt with in 50 years. And now it's a point of no return. So I don't think a ceasefire is the right play in either situation, but I think it comes down to the inherent anti-Semitic attitudes of the left for those who would say, no ceasefire in Ukraine and Russia, let's keep supporting Ukraine, but we want a ceasefire in Israel, Gaza. Interesting question. Thanks for texting that in via the 710 KNUS app. But please, name and town if you wish to text in. 303-696-1971, our telephone number. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back on the other side, we will be joined by State Representative Ron Weinberg, who's got family in Israel, is Jewish himself. He'll offer some perspective as we continue. 710 KNUS, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Say goodbye to clutter and hello to convenience when you experience organization transformation in your home. Roll them out shelves. Your clutter transformation experts create affordable, Colorado-crafted, organized storage solutions. These custom options will maximize and organize your kitchen and bath storage as Roll them out shelves carefully designs and builds roll-out drawers to fit your space perfectly to clear the clutter. Contact owners Joyce and Brent at Roll them out Shelves to schedule your free in-home estimate today. Say good.
Coming back, Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler, News Talk 710 KNUS. 303-696-1971, our telephone number. Breaking news we will get to in a bit. Former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell has just pled guilty in the Georgia election subversion case. It is a plea deal, and we will get details on this coming up in a little bit. But it is a significant development in this story. But sticking with the subject of the last couple of hours, Israel and Hamas's brutal attack against our ally, and through their terrorism, brutality that we have not seen against Jews writ large since the Holocaust. And here at home, meanwhile, anti-Semitism seems to be growing, as we were talking about with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman out of Stoughton, Massachusetts, in the 7 o'clock hour. Let's talk about what's happening in Israel and more with the state representative here in Colorado who knows it quite well, has family in Israel. One of his parents is Israeli. Representative Ron Weinberg joins us here on the program. Good morning, sir, and welcome.
Good morning, Jimmy.
Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Let me just ask you sort of a top line. We are now nearly 2 weeks into this war, unprovoked, against the terrorists of Hamas that Israel is waging. Where are you at mentally? What are your thoughts? What are your perspectives, big picture?
You know, the big picture, the worry is this turning into a larger escalation in the Middle East involving all of the surrounding countries in Israel and, of course, the United States of America and its military. So my headspace right now is hopefully this is contained within, Gaza, Hezbollah, and Israel. Israel gets its hostages back. It cripples the terrorist threat in the region for that area, and then we move on.
In terms of America's support for Israel at this moment, I mean, unfortunately, the House of Representatives is bogged down in internal Republican issues of trying to find a speaker, which is holding back the ability to provide financial support and other aid in a new package for Israel. But that aside, once it is settled and they are able to move ahead with it, why is it, in your view, so critical that the United States provide full-throated support for our Israeli allies?
It's a great question, and it's a very simple answer, to be quite frank. It's once the Jews are gone, who do you think is next? Israel and the Christian community are tight. They are literally hand in hand, built together. The Western civilization core that we all enjoy is both Christian and Jew. So the Judeo-Christian fundamentals are literally hand in hand, and we need to be there for each other, and we have for years.
Talk to me about the state on the ground in Israel from the perspective of your family, what they're noticing, what their takeaways are. How is the situation there from your perspective?
It's fearful. I spoke yesterday, and all it is it's bombs overhead, it's sirens, and then they need to make the decision whether to run quickly into a shelter. And then this is the constant normal right now. There's no working, there's no going to the grocery store, there's no going outside, and it's complete terrorism. Bombs overhead and rushing into a shelter to make sure you're not going to get hit.
And so in this regard, what we're seeing in terms of Hamas's brutal attacks, I mean, I've never seen or heard anything like this. And here is what Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, said yesterday when he was standing side by side Germany's chancellor.
This is the savagery that we only remember from the Nazi crimes of the Holocaust. Hamas are the new Nazis. Hamas is ISIS in some instances worse than ISIS. And just as the world united to defeat the Nazis, just as the world united to defeat ISIS, the world has to stand united behind Israel to defeat Hamas.
Your reaction, Representative Ron Weinberg?
Yes, it's 100% correct. This is a world problem. This is not within the state of Israel, and it's only isolated to Israel. Again, it comes back to if Israel is not there, Hamas doesn't go away. It doesn't just disappear. It goes off to the next target. It goes off to the next women and children and babies. It doesn't stop in Israel, and everyone needs to get that into their head. And that's why it's a world global problem that everybody needs to address. This is not going away once Israel is eradicated.
Now, a couple of days ago, we saw the news abuzz about a blast that happened at a hospital in Gaza, a Palestinian hospital, reportedly several hundred, more than 500 killed, according to the Palestinian government. And initial reports from the media and from politicians out of D.C., like Rashida Tlaib, were that this was an Israeli strike against innocents. And yet now U.S. intelligence has confirmed what Israeli intelligence has been saying and what the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, had been saying, and what Bibi Netanyahu had been saying, which is this was not Israel. And the U.S. believes, as the Israelis, that it was Islamic Jihad, which is a proxy for Iran and which is affiliated with, friendly with, and works closely with Hamas, when they launched a series of rockets to Israel and one misfired. And yet it spread like wildfire. We still have the likes of Congresswoman Tlaib perpetuating this falsity that Israel was responsible for this attack and that it was an attack and that it was a war crime. Well, what do you make of that, especially in this heat of the moment and this spread and how it inflames things, especially when the media and American politicians are perpetuating this?
You know, it's absolutely ridiculous. And any representative that would propagate these falsities, they're fools, to speak quite plainly. This was not an attack. And come on, let's be real about this for a second. Hamas has lied to us on everything. So now we're going to believe their medical rally? This is a joke. This is an unorganized military that has no idea what they're doing with rockets. And look what happens. They end up blowing up their own stuff
and killing their own people. We're talking with Colorado State Representative Ron Weinberg, who's originally from South Africa. And as we were talking about before bringing you on, you grew up during apartheid in South Africa. And we keep hearing this claim. In fact, it is put out a couple of days ago by Allison Coombs, who is a member of the Aurora City Council, now running for city council at large. She's one of the latest in Colorado to perpetuate this idea that there were Israeli war crimes and apartheid. Talk to me, especially having family in Israel. I'm guessing you've been to Israel yourself and having grown up in South Africa. Do you agree with the assessment that Israel is an apartheid state? Why or why not?
You know, absolutely not. I grew up in South Africa. I lived in Israel for a short period. I visited multiple times. I grew up during apartheid. The comparison to apartheid is absolute ignorance of what apartheid even was, for Pete's sake. I mean, there's no separation of Jews and Palestinians in the state of Israel. Out of 9 million, 2 million people are not Jewish in the state of Israel, and they're living together just fine. How come? So the fact that anyone could even bring it to such ignorant comments of it being apartheid, that is where signs are alienating people from spaces, and that's not happening.
One thing that we are also seeing, and I appreciate the clarification there, has been the rise in anti-Semitic comments here at home. I know that you had spoken out and condemned comments of a colleague of yours now in the state house, Representative Tim Hernandez. Here's a taste of an exchange that he had a couple of weeks ago at a pro-Hamas rally or protest at the state capitol.
Women and children in the streets by Palestinian terrorists. I condemn any form of colonial violence that is perpetuated upon any group of people because I believe. Do you consider? Are you going to keep interrupting me so you can get some Twitter clout or what? I asked if liberating Palestine involves murdering women and children in the streets. Yes or no? I told you I believe in the liberation of Palestine, and I've already answered that question. And I think it's despicable what they're protesting for. Congratulations. And what you're protesting Congratulations. For. And the fact that you can't condemn women and children and elderly people being murdered in the streets. What about it?
And then on Friday, he finally put out a tepid apology video.
I condemn Hamas and their attack on innocent civilians that was targeted towards Israelis, but has resulted in the deaths and murder of Israeli folks, Palestinian folks, Arabs, Americans, and so many others. People who are harmed and suffering deserve our respect, and I have to apologize for the way that I caused harm in community by not making that explicitly clear. I got here because of my choices, my online decisions, and because I wasn't engaged with impacted community members. I liked tweets that were harmful, and my lack of condemnation when I was asked a question at a rally during a tense exchange left people with a lot of painful questions.
And then he went ahead to equivocate as well and do that both sidism between Israel and Hamas in essence, which is something that we are seeing more and more on the left, and it is quite staggering. By the way, this is the same state rep who previously called for a forceful cultural revolution, calling to mind Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. And also, of course, on 9 News, he refused to disavow violence. I'm wondering, Representative Weinberg, where you are at right now on your colleague Tim Hernandez, as well as the other sentiments that we are seeing from some other Democrats in the legislature at this point, vis-a-vis what's happening with Israel and Gaza.
You know, this is an exact example of why the people of Colorado should pay attention to who their politicians are. The Democratic Party is going down the path of terrible, terrible socialist Marxism, and it's never worked in any country in the history of the world. So this is the best time at this point to pay attention to who's getting into office and who's representing the people in Colorado, because I'm willing to bet it is not who they think they are.
Well, not only that, what we are seeing in example, Representative Hernandez or Representative Lorena Garcia, who also she's been perpetuating the idea of apartheid and in Israel and of war crimes by Israel. She was also appointed. Both of them are examples of appointed by a band of Democrats and not elected by Democrats. And you can see when the Democratic Party has the opportunity to appoint folks in some of these districts, this is the kind of person that they bring about.
Yeah, the appointment process definitely needs to be looked at its height, and with an effective caucus with engaged citizenry, it works. At this point in time, we're seeing a lack of involvement from people that are sick and tired of politics. And this is the result. The result is we get people in office that are not of the representation of the people of Colorado.
State Representative Ron Weinberg, just about out of time here. I want to ask you, so you're a state representative. You're not in Congress. Of course, the federal folks are who address direct aid to Israel and so forth. So as somebody who's here in Colorado, who's a state rep, you're not even in session. That won't happen until January. What can you and others who are listening do right now with regard to what is happening with Israel and Hamas? What would be your call to action?
My call to action would be take a look at what happened 2 weeks ago on that Saturday. Get the information and find out what actually happened, which is the barbarism and savagery of, you can't even compare these people to animals. They went in targeting kids. They went in targeting elderly ladies. People were gunned down at bus stations and in the street. They had no idea what was going on. This was not an attack on a fort. This is not an attack on a military establishment. This was literally a targeted attack on citizenry. Get yourselves informed as to who these people are. Put your backing behind what the right way is. What is the truth? seek out the truth, and justice will be served.
Educate your neighbors, in essence, is what I'm hearing from you, State Representative Ron Weinberg. Really appreciate you taking some time this morning, and our best and support, of course, to Israel and to the Jewish people.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you. Once again, State Representative Ron Weinberg, kind enough to join us on this Thursday morning. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number if you'd like to join in to the festivities. And you can text in on the 710 KNUS app on the smartphone. Name and town if you wish to text in. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brockler. We've got lots more coming up as we continue on Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS. Don't lose that number, folks. It's 303-696-1971. To join in the conversation here on 710 KNUS, Jimmy Sengenberger filling in for George Brockler today and tomorrow from 6 until 10. And in the 7 o'clock hour, we will be joined by retired Brigadier General Doug Slocum, who is a former tactical wing commander. He's a 35-year Air Force veteran, will offer some tremendous insights on the military side of what's happening overseas in Gaza with the war between Israel and the terrorist organization of Hamas. Just a few final thoughts on this topic. We will shift gears, unless you want to bring us back into the discussion on Israel, of course, as we are wide open in the fourth and final hour, 303-696-1971. And we will get into a couple of stories. Breaking news, Trump attorney Sidney Powell has entered a plea deal and entered a plea of guilty in the Georgia election case. We will talk about that and what's happening there coming up, as well as the House leadership debacle among Republicans right now. This is crazy. We'll get to it coming up here in the next hour. Meantime, Joe Biden will be addressing the nation at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. I know Stephen Tubbs will be carrying the address live on his show. And I hope it's powerful. He's going to be talking about both Israel and Ukraine, at least powerful in his language. His delivery is never that way. But I think this is a moment where Biden has to be showing and displaying fortitude and explain to the American people why we need to support Israel, why we need to support Ukraine. Because I agree with him wholeheartedly on both of those issues. Israel needs to be stood by. The American people, the United States needs to stand by Israel, needs to support Israel fully and unequivocally. And the same goes for Ukraine. I have said this on the Ukrainian issue many times, that throughout the entirety of the Cold War, Sweden and Finland were neutral. The entirety of the Cold War. But now in the year 2023, they are joining or have joined NATO because they recognize the growing threat of Russia's ambitions under Putin, who fancies himself a 21st century Peter the Great. That is not my wording. That is his own wording, that he wants to be the next Peter the Great. So, of course, if they're startled enough to join NATO, that should tell us all we need to know about the essential nature of what's happening with Ukraine defending itself against Russia's unprovoked aggression, an attempt to retake Ukraine. So hopefully Biden expresses with fortitude and clarity why it is important, and not just important, but essential for the United States to support Israel and to support Ukraine. And it's especially important when we have the likes of AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, expressing, you know what, I'm not so sure the kind of support that we need, for example, on Iron Dome.
Do you believe now that funding is essential? Would you vote for it today?
And to be clear, at that time, I had voted present on the Iron Dome funding because of what we had seen previously that year in terms of Netanyahu's decisions, which also resulted in the bombing of several buildings that contain media agencies, civilian targets. However, I do think that in this present moment, when we discuss support for Israeli defense systems, that is absolutely legitimate. I think it is absolutely something that whose support we can. So
you would vote yes today if it came to the United States Congress, additional funding for the Iron Dome?
I think if it was explicitly around that, I have concerns about white phosphorus. I have concerns about the respect for humanitarian about human rights.
That kind of equivocation from a member of Congress is the exact sort of thing that Biden needs to reject. I would like to see him reject it categorically, but at the very least, show the exact opposite. And with clarity and with strength, again. I have to go back to what we were discussing in the earlier hour, the 7 o'clock hour with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman, when he talked not just about the need to support Israel, but about some of the broader implications. So did Representative Ron Weinberg when he said, if Hamas gets through with Israel, they're not going to stop at the Jews. And that is very true. But in general, what we are seeing in this country is oftentimes this rhetoric that is under the guise of anti-Israeli policy that is fundamentally anti-Semitic or outright Jew hatred. And we are seeing it on college campuses. We are thankfully seeing pushback from influential mega donors to college campuses that are saying, wait a second, I'm not putting my money behind this drivel. But we are seeing, I mean, the video of people in our own country and in London and other parts of the world taking down signs that are posted showing abducted innocents. And they're taking down these signs. Oh, well, what about the Palestinians and what about Hamas? It is just vile. We're seeing it more and more, and it needs to be categorically rejected. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler, 710 KNUS. All right, it's the final hour of today's show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler today as well as tomorrow here on News Talk 710 KNUS. And, of course, 6 to 9 on Saturday with the Jimmy Sengenberger Show. Reading here from The Hill, breaking news in the last half hour or so. Trump-aligned attorney Sidney Powell on Thursday pleaded guilty to 6 misdemeanor counts in the Georgia 2020 election interference case after reaching a plea agreement with prosecutors, the second defendant in the sweeping case to do so. And let's be clear about who Sidney Powell is relative to this case. She was going to be the one to expose it all. She was about to release the Kraken. And then she was about to release the Kraken. And then release the Kraken. And there was no Kraken that came. The hero did not bring the proof. And now she has pleaded guilty. Powell appeared before Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McCarthy to enter her plea just days before her trial was scheduled to begin next week. How do you plead to the 6 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties? Asked Daisha Young, a Fulton County prosecutor. Guilty, Powell said. McAfee accepted Powell's plea and said that she cannot withdraw it. She was sentenced to 6 years probation, a $6,000 fine, and $2,700 in restitution. She will also be required to, quote, testify truthfully in future proceedings and must turn over any documents requested by the district attorney's office. And she was also required to submit a letter of apology to Georgia residents, which her lawyer indicated she had already done. To talk more about this breaking news, as well as what's happening in Washington, D.C. and the House of Representatives and more, syndicated columnist Ruben Navarrette, host of the Ruben in the Center podcast, joins me now. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
Jimmy, good to be with you again. Thanks.
Good to have you as always. Let's just jump right in. I gave some of the top line details on this plea agreement. What do you make of it?
You know, it was striking. I started to read the story because in a sea of not guilties, where people are always saying they're not guilty and they want to go to trial, Sidney Powell, a lawyer, had made this calculus that, no, I'm going to take this deal. I'm going to plead guilty. I'm going to get probation for 6 years. I'm going to get a less severe sentence than a lot of other people are handed out. I'm going to pay a little restitution, make an apology, which, as you said, her lawyer said she'd already done. This was as good a deal as she's going to get, right? I mean, so I can see why she grabbed it. She doesn't have to worry about going to trial next week, and this was a pretty lenient resolution as far as she was concerned. It was a sweetheart deal, and I'm glad to see it. I think a lot of people were ready and willing to turn the page, and certainly I think the judge was happy to dispense with the case as well.
Of course, this was tied in with that RICO case. Powell had been charged or indicted on 7 charges in this case. What do you make of the bigger picture here, Ruben, as we now see the second person to plead guilty? And in this case, it was top Trump lawyer during the whole election stuff of 2020, 2021, and the one who was promising the most.
Well, you're right. There's a whole part of this RICO prosecution. It's a whole slew of people, right? Rudy Giuliani's in that pile. There's a number of folks. We'll see how others play this out. Yeah, we'll see how others play this out. There may be, there's a lot of not guilty pleas so far pending, and so we'll see ultimately what comes out in the long run. Also, I'm not sure it completely revealed exactly what she had to give, and what she gave prosecutors to get this sweetheart deal in terms of any additional information. But it just closes the Sidney Powell chapter, I think. But that was one small chapter in the overall book. There's plenty more people to come to trial and much more to wade through.
What do you think about this Georgia case? Because on the one hand, it seems like there's politics at play because you have a left-wing district attorney in Fani Willis. But at the same time, I mean, we have audio recordings of Trump. We have some other things that, I mean, there's enough here to get Sidney Powell to say, you know what, I'm not going to go any further. I'm going to plead guilty before the trial next week. Bigger picture, how big of a deal do you think this case is? How real?
I think it's a real case. I mean, I did not like the overcharging aspect. I think the Atlanta prosecutor was accused of piling on, even by people who don't like Trump, who are supportive of the other indictments. They thought that the federal case by Jack Smith, you know, both federal cases by Jack Smith, related to the documents in Mar-a-Lago and to the election interference charge, but that was sufficient. And so I was sensitive to the idea of the piling on, not because I'm sympathetic to Donald Trump, but because there's this backfiring effect. We saw that exactly happened. That exactly happened. And then I flipped it around and I said during the impeachment debate, Republicans were set to make the same mistake Democrats did, which is by going overboard and going after Joe Biden, you end up sort of rallying his supporters around him. So that's the way our politics work. But having said that, it's a real case, and there's some real defendants facing some real charges. And I think it's highly unlikely, Jimmy, that of the 10 or so defendants, as I recall, in this case, that they're all going to get the same sort of sweetheart deal that Sidney Powell got.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, especially because she got this out of the way earlier and was one of those who said, hey, I want the case to proceed for me earlier than next year. You know, Trump and some others had it punted to next year. Powell, that wasn't the case, and she clearly wanted to get this out of the way. Ruben Navarrette, syndicated columnist, our guest. Let's talk for just a moment about the political implications of all this for Trump in his attempt to become the Republican nominee. Once again, how do you handicap the legal cases relative to his likelihood of getting the nomination?
I'm sorry, it just broke up that last few words there.
How do you handicap the likelihood of Trump getting the nomination relative to these legal cases against him?
Yes, that's a good question. So everything we've seen, you know, as predicted, was as the prosecutors, these Democratic prosecutors, began to pile on, it looked increasingly bad for Trump in a legal sense, but better and better for him politically. That it had the same effect I talked about with regard to Biden and impeachment. It excited the base, excited the supporters. It said, we got to defend our guy, and that's exactly what happened with Trump and the indictment. It also is really terribly unfair to every other Republican who's running for office, no matter how you feel about them, because they can't get any oxygen, because every time there was an indictment, it took all that oxygen out of the room. All the focus is on Trump again. And I know that collectively, whether you're Chris Christie or Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or Vivek Ramaswamy, you all said, stop indicting him. Please, please stop indicting him. No more indictments, because you're killing my campaign. And I think that's another fair part of this. So ultimately, you know, how it all shakes out, we don't know. But these indictments are still problematic for him legally, but they're doing him great favors politically.
Do you think he ends up getting the nomination at this point?
Yeah, I don't think I think we probably have known this, Jimmy, since day one, if you want to be honest. It's very hard, even before we saw the very first poll, to think that someone who has been president before, who does the unprecedented and runs again, won't be the nominee, because he already has that base of support. He starts off with, 50 million votes, if you want to put it that way. So he, I think, is most certainly the nominee going forward. And also, come on, the other group has not done themselves much good. You know, I've been impressed, as some people have, with Nikki Haley, even before this more recent foreign policy crisis. I think she speaks well, handles herself well. I think she's the grown-up in the room. She's tough when she needs to be. I've been impressed with her. But in the overall, I mean, if you look at the clown show that typically these GOP debates turns out to be, you can see Donald Trump at home saying, "Man, I'm glad I stayed home. I'm glad I didn't go to that thing. You know, I would have. This was beneath me." And that's why he doesn't suffer. One reason why he doesn't suffer in the polls every time he skips a debate.
Sure.
So it's a combination of things. He's doing great, and his opponents on the Republican side are doing terribly.
Speaking of Republicans, let's look at the U.S. House of Representatives, where yesterday the second vote for Speaker of the House took place. Jim Jordan lost by 22 Republican votes. He needs, I think, all but just a handful, like 4 or 5 in order to become the Speaker of the House. And that was more than the 20 that he didn't show up on Tuesday. Among those who voted against Jim Jordan both of those days, and who also happened to vote yes on removing Kevin McCarthy from the Speaker's chair, is Colorado Republican Ken Buck, who yesterday, I believe it was pushed by the media on whether or not he would support Jordan and what it would take to get his support. Take a listen to this.
15 hours away from tomorrow's vote, though. I mean, how do you plan to vote on the first ballot tomorrow?
So Jim is going to come visit after this meeting. We're going to sit down at the Nova's office, but we're going to meet him, and I'm going to tell him a no right now, but you can told him I would be open-minded to having that conversation.
And what are some of the things you're going to bring up in that conversation?
Well, if I bring them up now, it doesn't sound like I should get involved in the conversation, so I'm going to expand that conversation with you. We can talk after.
Tell us why you're a no right now.
That's a way of asking.
Let me ask you, is there anything that he could say to convince you to change your mind?
There are a lot of things.
Like what?
We asked him 3 different
You say you're a no right now. If the vote were
conversation, I don't know how to say this politely.
You're a no right now.
It was a little hard to hear there, but basically he's asked 3 different times, what would it take to bring you on board? And he was, I can't give that answer. And he was playful in saying that, but he fundamentally, the main point that he was saying is, look, I'm a no, and this was actually on Tuesday night before yesterday's vote. I'm a no right now, but I'm open-minded. How open-minded are these 22 who voted no yesterday, in essence, on Jordan, especially when we're seeing for both the Washington Examiner and Politico, as well as other outlets, that the pressure campaign that they're trying to bring from Jordan, his team, and allies is turning them off more than it is incentivizing them to get on board.
Yes, you call it a pressure campaign. Some of the Republicans in the Congress, Republicans, mind you, are calling it blackmail, bullying, harassment. That's what the Republicans are saying. And they're saying that they are now inclined to less and less to vote for Jordan, that the tactics are backfiring. I think there's 3 things that come to mind when we hear this story. One is you have to think back to Kevin McCarthy, this name from the past, this distant past, right? This is somebody who was a moderate, but was also able to stitch together enough votes to finally win. And I don't think that Jim Jordan or virtually anybody else can do what McCarthy did. Give him credit for that. He was his own undoing because he was not trustworthy. He lied to fellow Republicans. He made promises he didn't keep to fellow Republicans, in addition to what he did to Democrats. So, but that's separate and apart from having sort of the right mixture chemistry to get elected.
Ruben, can I just, before you get to that second point, can I just jump in and say that in the case of McCarthy, he was trying to do it the deal-making way. Of course, he overpromised and then under-delivered. The Jordan folks are doing the exact opposite, which is rather than trying to strike deals, at least it seems this way, they are using strong-armed tactics to say, hey, you need to get in line, and it's not working.
Yeah, you have to consider the source here. Kevin McCarthy is somebody who seemed to have been proud to be House Speaker, something he had worked toward all of his career. And when the House was attacked in the January 6th insurrection, he, together with Mitch McConnell, took the establishment view of how dare they, this is unacceptable, whereas Jim Jordan was seen as one of the instigators and someone who was called even by fellow Republicans this kind of bomb thrower. So there's all this. I think it was John Boehner who first referred to him as a terrorist, right? You're a legislative terrorist. He called Jim Jordan that.
That's right.
These are, again, the Republicans. I mean, forget the Democrats. This is what Republicans say about Jordan, and this is why he can't get that support. The second point I was going to make was the flip side of that coin is, I don't want a squishy moderate. Great. Why don't you go for a hardcore conservative? And then when you do that, you lose the votes of the moderate. And that's exactly what's happening. And third was the point about that we made earlier about the backfiring, the tactics. You really have to know how to get votes and basically threatening people and saying, hey, we're going to have constituents call you. People who don't even live in your district are going to call you, going to harass you. Jimmy, there's even been a report by a Republican member of Congress that she's been getting death threats. From constituents and from non-constituents who say you better vote for Jordan or else.
2 people now are apparently claiming that.
That is not the way to persuade people and win votes. I've
No.
picked this, and every time he takes a vote, Jim Jordan's going to get fewer votes every single time.
Well, and let's be clear that Jordan has no responsibility directly for any death threats that are claimed. But the point is not that. The point is that when you have this kind of pressure campaign and you're really launching it both privately and publicly, then you can see the animosity build.
Yeah, and let's play with that. Let's say that it's the Democratic side, and let's say the squad is piping off about Israel, as it tends to do. If the White House says, well, President Biden had nothing to do with that, he didn't pipe off, he's been quite clear in his support for Israel. He doesn't speak for the squad, and the squad doesn't speak for him. Well, our natural response is to come back and say, yes, but you can speak out publicly against the squad. You can let them know that they're going to need you as president, and you're not going to be there for them next time around if they don't shut up. Okay? So likewise, I'm not going to play this game that somehow, somebody threatened this Republican congresswoman, but Jim Jordan had nothing to do with that. He can stop it. He can stop it today if he wants to.
There is something to be said for that, for sure. Ruben Navarrette, a syndicated columnist, as well as host of the Ruben in the Center podcast. I want to, real quick, do you think that it's possible, as Newt Gingrich has suggested, that they could just say, for now through January, let's just have the bow tie wearing Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry, remain in that position for the time? I think that's the way they're going to have to go.
They should go that way. Patrick McHenry, who I didn't know from Adam before he took to the gavel, I love this guy. This guy's looking better and better and better by the day. Okay, he seems like a rational grown-up, and I'm all for it. I was all for this idea that he was just a temporary placeholder. Let's find somebody else. But if this is the way it's going to go, I much prefer that. One idea, obviously, that you and I would agree is a non-starter is this crazy thing you hear from the liberal media about power sharing agreements with the Democrats. Okay?
Right.
That's
ludicrous.
A non-starter. The Democrats would never go for that. Let's be real. Nancy Pelosi would have never gone for that, and the Republicans will never go for this. But the roots of this all go back not to January 6th. The roots go back to the election, to November, because you and I have had this conversation before. If the Republicans had done better in that election, okay, and I think they were hurt by various issues and the way they played it, from immigration, abortion, and the like, their reaction to January 6th, whatever it is that they did wrong, they did something wrong, because there's no way that Joe Biden and the Democrats could have limped across the finish line the way they did, and given Republicans control of the House by a handful of votes. If the Republicans had taken control of the House by 20 votes, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. If you have a larger majority, then you can manage to sacrifice a certain number of votes, and that works out better on legislation as well as leadership. We're just about out of time, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because you wrote an excellent piece for your syndicated column about Harvard students being linked to an anti-Israel letter, and the lesson that they have been learning about consequences. Funnily enough, my column tomorrow talks about consequences vis-a-vis opposition to Israel as well, in a different way. What are you saying there? This is something we talked about with Rabbi Jonathan Hausman in the 7 o'clock hour, so I'm curious.
I think that Republicans have always had it wrong when they speak out against cancel culture. I have written many times that I am pro-cancel culture, because cancel culture is about holding people accountable on the right and on the left. And there have always been cases of left-wing people who piped off. Kathy Griffin, good example, holding up the mock bloody head of Donald Trump, right? She cries, they canceled me. Yeah, they did, right? So I'm okay with the left getting canceled and the right getting canceled. In this case, what's ironic to me is a lot of Republican and conservatives who previously say they don't like cancel culture when it applies to Tucker Carlson now want to cancel these students. And I am consistent. I'm still pro-cancel culture. I think to some degree these students should be canceled. They're going to learn a life lesson about how you don't sign a document you haven't read. And if you do read it and do sign it, then you own up to it. If this in fact is civil disobedience, let's keep in mind that the most famous example of that, Martin Luther King wrote his letter from the Birmingham jail. So now they have to go to figurative jail. They have to take their punishment, and they shouldn't cry about it and whine about it. This is welcome to life, pals. So this is what they don't teach you at Harvard.
We don't have time to really get into this today, but we should explore in the future in another conversation, Ruben, about the idea of being supportive of cancel culture versus recognizing that there are some times where having somebody canceled is is worthwhile, but not having a culture of it, that there could be a distinction there between that. So I'll be curious to unpack that down the line, but we got to call it there. Ruben Navarrette, syndicated columnist. Check out his podcast, Ruben in the Center, on which I was at the end of last month. So be sure, any platform, to go give it a listen. Ruben, thank you, my friend.
Brother Jimmy, thank you. Bye-bye.
Once again, Ruben Navarrette, syndicated columnist, joining us here on The George Show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler. What are your reactions and takes? How about it? Sidney Kraken Powell has just pleaded guilty in the Georgia case. What does that tell you about where things are at in that regard? And how about Jim Jordan and the battle for the speakership, whether that is Ken Buck opposing it or the general tone and tenor of the dysfunction that we're seeing? 303-696-1971. You can also text into the show on the 710 KNUS app on your smartphone. Name and town if you wish to text in. Keep it right here. Jimmy in for George, Denver's local talk leader, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Say goodbye to clutter and hello to convenience when you experience organization transformation in your home. Roll them out shelves. Your clutter transformation experts create affordable, Colorado-crafted, organized storage solutions. These custom options will maximize and organize your kitchen and bath storage as Roll them out shelves carefully designs and builds roll-out drawers to fit your space perfectly. To clear the clutter, contact owners Joyce and Brent at Roll them out shelves to schedule your free in-home estimate today.
Rocking and rolling back. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you, and for George Brockler today and tomorrow on News Talk 710 KNUS. Our telephone number, 303-696-1971. I believe the U.S. House is readying to do a third vote. I think they're planning to do that on Speaker of the House again today after 2 defeats for Jim Jordan. Now, I said this in the first hour. I like Jim Jordan. I'm cool with the idea of a Speaker Jordan. But there are a couple of challenges with this. Questions, doubts that I have. Use your word. Concerns. One, he doesn't have a legislative track record of getting things done in terms of what Congress is about, legislation. And sponsoring and shepherding legislation. That's the number one role of a Speaker of the House, is to oversee that, to get things done. Doesn't have that track record. I also think that he's lacking some of the leadership skills as embodied in the way in which Republicans have been, as Ruben Navarrette was talking about in the last segment, have been saying, look, we're being blackmailed. We're being browbeaten. They're coming after us big time. 2 have said they've gotten death threats from people for not supporting Jim Jordan. And that's excessive and unacceptable. And death threats are never appropriate or acceptable. But the point is that it seems the Jordan team is not taking the right tact to win over Republicans. Now, McCarthy did the exact opposite. He overpromised. And that's an issue on the other hand, because then if you can't deliver on those promises and you're held accountable for it, well, here we are. You lose the speakership. The other thing about Jim Jordan is he is excellent on TV. When he's in those Judiciary Committee hearings and he's got somebody in front of him that he's grilling, boom, you don't want to mess with Jim Jordan. And that is an asset. You can't do that if you're Speaker of the House. It's not about a TV role. It's about leadership and getting things done. And right now you need that in Congress more than anything, especially with a war in Israel that requires our support and with an impending government shutdown that at this point you can't say that it's necessary because you don't even have Republicans hashing it out. 303-696-1971. What do you think is going on here? And what do you think is going on with Congressman Ken Buck and his heretofore refusal to vote for Jim Jordan? Let's go to Janice in Walsenburg. Good morning, Janice. How are you?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I wanted to make some comments about Ken Buck. Every time he has an excuse of why he isn't voting for somebody, he equivocates on some little minority reason. It's never the same one. Real Republicans voted for him to get in office, and he went to Washington and wrote this fine book on the swamp.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden he becomes this and that we don't even recognize.
Well, is that genuinely the case here, though? Because in this instance, the objections that he seems to have, there are a few of them, and I don't think that makes him the instances that he's citing concerns make him a rhino or make him a total flip-flopper from where he was before. You may disagree with where he's at on Jim Jordan, but I don't see how it shows that he's somehow totally changed his tune on Washington, D.C., or in his time in Washington, D.C.
Well, do you think it's personal because he got passed over for the House Judiciary Committee?
It's entirely possible it's entirely possible that could play a role. Who knows? But even if it did, what that shows is, at least in the case of Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy and his decision to vote no on McCarthy, maybe there were personal animosities there. That shows failures of leadership on the part of the likes of McCarthy or a Jim Jordan when you're not rallying there in the appropriate way. I think that there is something to be said for that. There's also something to be critical of if it's solely based on some sort of personal animosity or personal reason. Yeah, that's not a good thing. But I don't think that's the case here with Buck and Jordan. I think that there are several reasons that Buck has. I don't know. I can't get in his head, but it seems like it.
And this guy that they're promoting, Jeffries, what are his qualifications?
Well, the Democrats are promoting Jeffries because he's their leader. Absolutely not to Hakeem Jeffries, that's for sure.
Well, why can't the Democrats all stick together? Every single one of them vote right down the line. And
you know
what?
Republicans
can't do it. What is wrong with them?
Yes, you are hitting on something. I got to leave it there, Janice. I want to build off of that exact point because I think you're raising something very critical, which is that Republicans can't get their house in order. Literally, in this case, get their house in order. Listener text came in. I do not understand why it was fine to have 15 rounds of votes for speaker when McCarthy was voted in, but Jordan has to give up after 3. More typical non-Democrat double standard BS. And Ken Buck must be voted out of office. Okay, it's an opinion on Ken Buck. Let's go to the 15 rounds of votes for speaker when McCarthy was voted in, but Jordan has to give up after 3. Let me ask you a question. Was Kevin McCarthy made a stronger or a weaker speaker after 15 votes? Especially given all the promises that he had to make in order to become speaker, promises he could not deliver on and ultimately was held accountable for by fellow Republicans. I would submit to you that with each round of voting, McCarthy made himself increasingly weaker as a speaker. And it goes in part to the point that Janice just raised. The Democrats fall in line here when it comes to their leadership. And guess what? Pelosi would. I made this point many times since January. Pelosi would never have let it get to the floor without her having the votes in line in advance. She was the master of whipping votes and getting people to fall in line. There was an effort on the far left to have a force the vote effort where the left-wingers would, back in 2021, I think it was, they were pushing for the left to hold over Pelosi's head the speakership. You have to have votes on this, this, and this in order to become speaker. And that never happened. They never made that effort because Pelosi knew how to get them in line. And what we are seeing here is whether it is 3 votes or 15 votes or 100 votes for Jim Jordan or 15 votes for Kevin McCarthy, the Republicans are showing right now that they don't know how to govern because they can't get their house in order, because they can't get this sorted out, because they're not acting like adults. And this goes from Jim Jordan to Ken Buck to Kevin McCarthy to the rest of them. All of the Republicans, 217, I think, of Republicans that are in the House own some responsibility for this. No, I don't think that having 15 rounds of voting for Jordan is acceptable because it happened for McCarthy. We were at a point in January where things were just getting started with the new Congress. Republicans had just taken control. There's a time for getting your leadership sorted out. Now we are midway, and there is a big issue with the fiscal cliff right now, and with an impending government shutdown, with a war in Israel where our Israeli allies need our support, and Congress can't act because guess what? The House doesn't have a speaker. I don't care who you are or what party. That ain't good for the American people, nor is it good for Republicans politically. Because then they end up getting blamed for a government shutdown, and guess what? They deserve the blame if it happens because they couldn't get a leader in 2 to 3 weeks midstream. When before, The polling was multiple polls showed Biden and the Democrats were ready to get the blame for a shutdown. Then they remove McCarthy, and then they get to this point where they can't fill that spot. It's time to just cut your losses and get to Patrick McHenry if you can't sort this out in the next couple of days. Give it a few more votes. That's fine. But if by the end of this week, going into the weekend, you don't have the speaker sorted out, work something out for McHenry to be in charge going in through January, and then use the holiday Christmas break to get this thing sorted out. I don't know. What do you think? 303-696-1971. Real quick before we have to go to our break, let's go to Jay. Jay, good morning. You're on with Jimmy and for George.
Oh, gosh, I had such a great point you were talking about, but it's not real quick. But the
Go ahead.
Democrats are
You're fine.
so good at following, like Pelosi.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. It could be into the arms of death or whatever. They'll just do it. They're just such followers. But do you remember when McCarthy was running? I'm sure you do. Guy running across the Senate or the Congress floor was going to punch the Florida congressman
Yes.
because he wouldn't vote for McCarthy.
Yes, and that Florida congressman was Matt Gaetz.
Okay, and Matt Gaetz, and then the guy got carted off by the general place there in Congress. One of the problems I have with this situation is I don't think they planned on McCarthy actually being removed, and Gaetz and the group there thought they were going to get their way again because they got their way before. McCarthy made a deal with them, some sort of a deal. And I just feel like they just need to put the guy back in. He seems like a politician. He seems reasonable and capable of discussing things with both sides of the House. And I really like what Jim Jordan's doing, an investigation for the Biden crime family, because that hair on the back of that gorilla needs to be exposed, 2 years ago, but we need to do it now.
I appreciate the call, Jay. Thank you. 303-696-1971 is our telephone number. Text coming in from Carolyn Golden. The point to me is with McCarthy, we at least had a speaker. Now we look weak and bumbling. It could cause loss of Republican majority for the next election because we appear incompetent and disunified. Or ununified, whichever the word is. I raised this point earlier, and I think it fits with what you're saying, Carol. The Denver School Board is likely to see 3 new members. One, no matter what, because Tay Anderson had only 9% approval, and he said, okay, I'm calling it quits, and I'm not going to run for re-election because I'm inevitably going to lose. But there are 2 incumbents who, very good chance, looks like that they will lose. Scott Balderman and Charmaine Lindsay. Looking at the way things are and the fact that Mayor Mike Johnston just announced that he's endorsed the non-union candidates. That would be John Youngquist, Marlene De La Rosa, and Kimberly Sia, the non-union candidates. And it's because the Denver Public Schools Board is so dysfunctional that he felt, I need to get into this and make it clear that I'm opposed to this dysfunction and want to change. That's the same kind of mindset that we could see from Americans across the country going into 2024. And guess what? It will weaken the presidential nominee, whoever that is, even more. I don't get it. Except there are too many cooks in the kitchen and not enough chefs. We'll see what happens. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Got to run to a break. We've got a couple minutes more on the other side here on The George Show. Jimmy in for George, Denver's local talk leader, 710 KNUS. Rocking this house into the end of today's show. Jimmy Sengenberger in for George Brockler. Deborah Flora up from 3 to 4. Then Stephen Tubbs on his farewell tour from 4 to 7. Right here on 710 KNUS. I'm back in the saddle again tomorrow morning. We will talk with veteran political almanac. I like to call him the one-man political almanac. Michael Barone, senior political analyst at the Washington Examiner, will join me at 6:30. We'll be talking with retired Brigadier General Doug Slocum, who is a former tactical wing commander, 35-year Air Force veteran. He's going to offer insights from the military side on what's happening between Israel and Gaza. We'll see what else we have in store. Then I really wanted to get in this clip of we got a couple clips of Pierre Poilievre. I think that's how you say his name. He's running for prime minister in Canada, and he is the conservative candidate. And he just brilliantly, in a masterclass, showed how to handle the left-wing media when they try to pin you down by questioning their premises as you're going. And he was snacking on an apple as he did it. It was just wonderful. I want to get to that tomorrow here on the program. And of course, Saturday morning, there's the Jimmy Sengenberger show from 6 until 9. I really hope that the Republicans can get there together in the House, because Israel needs our support. Democrats need to get the blame for government shutdown if it happens. Look, you get a Speaker of the House in there, then they have to negotiate within the caucus. Then they have to negotiate with the Senate. They got to negotiate with Biden. There are a lot of things that need to come into place. And the idea that this Congress can get it together just on the fiscal side of things, especially without doing a continuing resolution again, I don't see how that's plausible or possible. You give fodder. I'm sick and tired of Republicans giving fodder to the left from unforced errors. Why? It's unnecessary. Whether it's Jim Jordan or somebody else, get it together, get a speaker, move on forward, and make it happen. Time literally is of the essence. Literally of the essence. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, been filling in for George Brockler. Check out my website, jimmysengenberger.com, where you can email me 24/7, 365. All E's all the time in Sengenberger. No AI or U. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. I have to say, I love Billy. You'll appreciate this. I went to Tommy Castro concert last Friday, last Friday. And I sat in with him. He's a blues guy, and he played at Ophelia's Electric Soapbox. And I had a listener come up to me. I sat in, and after I sat in, he shook my hand, and he just said, all E's. And I said, all the time. His name is Norm, and that was fun. That is it for me. Back tomorrow, same time, same place. Thanks to George for having me sit in both of these days. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And as I always like to say, may God bless America.